and have everyone introduce themselves that is a part of our new executive board. I will start out. I am your president, Emily Smith. I live in Missouri, and I am finishing up my master's here with the Chicago School. Really excited, finishing up internship. So I will pass it over to Alana.
Hi everyone. Sorry I'm not on video. My power's flickering in and out, so you probably won't be able to see me anyway. But I am the vice president. I'm actually just completed last year the master's program at the Chicago School. And right now I'm a PhD student with the Chicago School for Counselor Education and Supervision.
I can go next. I'm Catherine Schmidlin. I'm the secretary and I live in Ohio. And I'm also in my second year of the master's program here at Chicago.
Oh, Mitch, you're on mute.
Thank you. I'm Mitch. I'm the new treasurer, and I live in Oregon, and I'm also in my second year.
So I'll jump in. I actually have had the opportunity to meet Leo previously at the SAGE conference in October. I am Dr. Amy Crowley. I am the primary chapter faculty advisor for Theta Chi Sigma and have been since its inception in 2016. So I've been here for a while. Dr. Lip.
I will, thank you, Dr. Crowley. I will follow up with that. Dr. Scott Lip, and I am also a chapter co-advisor, chapter faculty co-advisor. It's a mouthful. And definitely happy to be here and support all of you. So thanks for having me.
Crystal, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Crystal. I am the committee rep, and I'm in New York City. And I graduated in April. Actually, next week I'll be walking in Chicago, so I'm pretty excited for that. And also happy Pride Month and happy Men's Mental Health Awareness Month as well.
Yes, thank you for adding that. All right, we're very excited to have our guest speaker tonight to talk a little bit about advocacy, and Leo Khan-Snyder is legislative for the passion for working with marginal populations, particularly serving LGBTQIA+ clients communities. Leo has been passionate about developing a strong social justice advocacy presence at the state and national level, where advocacy focuses including providing education, writing position statements, and the advocacy center. All right, so Leo, I am going to
I think that won her connection.
Yep.
It did. So Leo, please feel free to go ahead and get started.
Yeah. Catherine, would you mind sharing host to me so that I can share my slides?
Absolutely. But I don't know how to do that. Let's see.
If you click on Leo's name in the participants list, that you should then be able to click on it and make
Oh, Emily is back to host now.
I am back. I'm so sorry. I don't know what's going on with my connectivity tonight, but all right.
So we would like to make you a co-host just so he can share his. Yeah, there we go. I see it.
Got it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. And So can everybody see slides okay? So I am an openly queer and trans mental health counselor. I live in Sioux City, Iowa. So I am at the Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota tri-state border out in the middle of nowhere. I actually work at a private, at a group practice out in Storm Lake, Iowa. So out in rural, farm country. I'm the Legislative and Public Policy Committee Chair for the American Counseling Association of Iowa for 9 more days. I've been our chair since January of last year. I'm the president-elect for the American Counseling Association of Iowa, so that is the role I'll be taking on as of July 1st. I will be president-elect. I'm a Public Policy Committee member with SAGE, and I'm the Educational Health and Wellness Co-Director for SUX Pride in Sioux City. I've been doing advocacy work for quite some time. Started while I was in my master's program. I actually just graduated from Bellevue University in August of last year. So I'm not too far removed from where y'all are at. And the primary forms of advocacy that I have engaged in are position statement writing, coalition building, providing professional presentations, and building educational spaces. The current legislative landscape for LGBTQIA plus individuals in the United States is pretty dim. As of June of this year, more than 520 anti-LGBTQ plus bills have been proposed in 41 states, and over 60 of these bills have passed their respective legislatures. So if you look at the graph, this has broken records for both bills introduced and bills passed. Over 220 of these proposed bills are specifically anti-transgender legislation. This is also a record-breaking number of bills introduced. This includes gender-affirming care bans, sports bans, bathroom bills. There's been a huge increase in the number of these anti-LGBTQ plus bills. And we also want to acknowledge that this legislative landscape is going to vary from state to state. So some states are seeing a greater impact of this legislation than others. So I want to be very mindful as we move through this discussion, this conversation, that some of these things will be more applicable to you than others, just depending on the legislative landscape of where you live. I also want to be very cautious within this in noting that resources are going to look different depending on where you live, depending on the populations that you work within. So I live in a city, quote unquote city. It's a small city in my state, but we still have a fair amount of resources. But I work out in a rural community where we don't have a lot of resources. We don't see a lot of things. So the impact of this type of legislation is going to be different where I currently live versus where I currently work, even being in the same state. So I do want to be mindful of that kind of as we move forward through this conversation. This is heavy work. This is really stressful work, but this is work that can be done at a number of different levels. Some of the types of legislation that's been introduced includes legislation that limits people's IDs, including restrictions on name changes and gender marker changes, undermining non-discrimination laws, including allowance for value-based provision of care services, and trans athlete bans. And just in case anyone isn't aware of like the allowance for values-based provision of care, it's basically saying that if your personal religious beliefs or your personal values don't align with being LGBTQIA plus affirming, you can refer somebody to another provider based on your personal beliefs, which is something that is directly against the American Counseling Association Code of Ethics. So we're undermining our ethics and we're undermining a lot of non-discrimination laws as well. Restricting freedom of speech and expression. So that includes drag bans. That also includes our trans athlete bans. That also includes our gender marker changes. There's a lot of overlap in these. limits or bans on certain types of healthcare. So this includes HRT restrictions, bans on affirming healthcare access. Particularly, we've seen access for minors targeted, but we've even seen that broaden in the legislative scope throughout this legislative session. Limiting public accommodations, so including bathroom bans, including athlete bans, including restrictions on name changes, gender marker changes. Again, there's a lot of overlap and crossover. And censoring our curriculum. So things like the critical race theory bans, don't say gay bills, talking about things that we are and aren't allowed to provide education on within our school systems, within, I've seen, public governmental entities be targeted as well. So if you are a governmental agency, you may or may not be able to talk about some of these topics within your setting. So we're seeing curriculum not only be censored at the school level, but also censoring things that we can educate on in other spaces as well. I wanted to share my journey in advocacy with you because I think a lot of times we feel like this work isn't accessible as students and as new professionals. And I really want to challenge the narrative around that because, as I just demonstrated with the last couple of slides, this impact is broad. This impact is vast. And so there are things that we can do at a number of different levels. And you don't have to be the most experienced professional. You don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to, work within these super high stakes spaces in order to make an impact, in order to make a difference. So my journey in advocacy included graduate student committee work. It included work with faculty on presentations and advocacy in those spaces. It included organizational advocacy during my internships, and it includes state and national level advocacy work. Graduate student committees, particularly for those of you who are still in school, who are still involved in the system, are a really, really great way to connect with other graduate students and to have a foot in the door that feels a little bit more comfortable because you're with your peers. Oftentimes in graduate student committees, work groups will be formed. So depending on the type of work that you want to do, if you want to help with education, there's an education work group. If you want to help with advocacy, there might be an advocacy work group. If you want to help with social media, there might be a social media work group. These work groups kind of tailor themselves to the strengths of committee members and are really formed to help people grow and develop in a space that is safe. Through graduate committee work, you can develop collaborative relationships for projects with other grad students. So I've seen students from grad committees go on to present together at conferences, to present together to state counseling boards, to present together to different divisions and other associations. Grad student committees are a really great way to become informed about what's happening in the division or branch you're on a committee for. So I was on the graduate student committee for the American Counseling Association of Iowa, starting back in 2020. And pretty quickly, I learned about the structure of the board and different positions that I could potentially hold in the future and how people worked within those spaces. From being on the graduate student committee, I became the Western Region chair and got to work with a lot of event planning, continuing education, coordination, etc. And kind of develop my base within the board and develop a good working relationship with other board members. I then became legislative and public policy committee chair and eventually was nominated for president-elect. So it was a really good way for me to become familiar with the organization and the space before moving into other leadership roles, if that happens to be a goal of yours. The Graduate Student Committee for SAGE, that I was also on back in 2020 with the current Public Policy Committee Chair, Jean Dockery for SAGE. They and I met as graduate student committee members, and we just stayed connected, and we kept doing the work, and we kept supporting each other through the work that we were doing. These are really, really good ways to become informed about what's happening in the division or branch you're on that committee for. And as I've demonstrated, find more ways to become involved. Are there other committees that pique your interest? Are there people that you want to do more work with? You may find people who have similar research interests, similar clinical interests, and it just forms a really good safe space to get started in this journey while you're still a student. There we go. Collaboration with mentors. I worked both with peer mentors and with faculty mentors. With peer mentors, including people that I met in grad student committees, you get to gain support from other people who are in your shoes. You get to collaborate on things that you'd like to see happen within your program or organization. So if you are working with a peer mentor, I had a wonderful peer mentor at Bellevue University that I would touch base with and say, hey, this is something that I've noticed in, how this class is taught or how this is structured. Did you notice the same thing when you were going through? How did you work through it? And, had the possibility to talk through what some of that looked like. And as necessary, we're able to provide feedback to faculty to say, hey, I'm just noticing that this is something that I'm really struggling with, and this is something that would have helped me. And I know that other students are recognizing this too. So developing those peer mentorship relationships can be really important to help build some of that collaborative advocacy. And you can start building those advocacy skills by empowering one another's when a need arises. So like I said, as necessary, we were able to go to faculty, and a situation that might have felt really scary for me to approach a faculty member with, being someone who was newer in the program, was something that someone more experienced in the program felt very comfortable approaching faculty about, because they had developed relationships with the faculty. And so, we were able to start building those advocacy skills and start empowering each other and help each other through that process as necessary. So peer mentorship relationships are really great ways to start building on some of those advocacy skills, again, in a safe space within your program where you can give and provide and be provided with feedback. For faculty mentors, you can learn about research, professional development, and other opportunities to share your knowledge. My faculty mentor was fantastic to work with when we had recognized that we had interests in similar areas and wanted to do something more, but neither one of us was quite sure what. So it started out as a few emails exchanged back and forth. And then emails became Zoom conversations that were, 30, 45 minutes long. And then that became, hey, we have a presentation out of this, something that could be shared in the counselor ed space, something that could be shared in the ACA space, something that could be shared at the state level. And through working with faculty who already have skills developed in these areas, they can help support you in developing those educational skills, those advocacy skills. You may end up having the opportunity to present with faculty mentors at various levels. I'm not sure if Chicago School does this. Bellevue University had a student symposium where we had opportunities to present at the school. If you don't have a student symposium, but there is something that you would still want to present to your faculty as a need that you're seeing arising, this may be a really great way to, collaborate with a faculty member to do that. You may also have opportunities to present at a state counseling association conference or a regional conference. So for me, that would have been the North Central region of ACES. So I presented at NC ACES with 2 of my faculty mentors, and possibly at a national conference, depending on the relationship that you have with your mentor and the space and time that each of you has and the interest that you have. Through working with faculty mentors, you can learn ways to shape your interests into sustainable action within your career. You don't have to do presentations. You don't have to go out there and do, again, this larger scale work. But I really encourage you to lean on the support that your faculty can give you in finding what would work for you. What does feel accessible to you? What does feel sustainable to you? Our faculty are a huge wealth of knowledge outside of just the information that they're able to provide to us in our courses. In organizational advocacy, this is a good way to get started doing some of that on-the-ground advocacy work in a way that may not feel quite as scary. For school organizational advocacy, if your faculty have course feedback forms, use those feedback forms. Let your faculty know what you're seeing in the class. Are you seeing a deficit area or an area where there could be some growth, something changed? Are you seeing something that they're doing really well and you want to see more of it? Use those feedback forms. Collaborate with faculty or the program director if you see a need. So things like diversity, accessibility. Make sure that all of these things within your program are working the way that they need to for students to succeed. Advocate with the school for diverse programming. Does your school have programming around Pride Month? Does your school have programming around Juneteenth, around BIPOC Mental Health Month? Are these things that you could talk to the school about and collaborate with other students or faculty in order to engage in some of this on-the-ground advocacy work within your school? What is the CSI chapter doing and what can they do? At your internship sites, you can ensure that the paperwork and forms that your site is using are accessible. Make sure that they have spaces for people to put a name that's not just their legal name. Make sure that your paperwork has spaces for people to identify their gender identity, their pronouns. Advocate with your supervisor to determine what resources you might need. Like I said, resources are going to vary widely from community to community. What resources do you have and what might you be missing? Do some advocacy on the ground there. Listen to your clients when you're in your internships. What are their needs? What are you seeing that your organization may be missing? Collaboration with other organizations is also huge. Help provide education and resources to organizations that you collaborate with, including health centers. If you collaborate with physicians of clients, it's a really great place to start doing some of that advocacy work and say, hey, I'm hearing some feedback around this, or I'm seeing a client who is struggling with some of these things and heard you may be able to help. Make yourself known as an established resource within your community. Our communities need us, and it is really important that we're visible in our communities. So that's where this organizational advocacy piece can really come into play and can be a really great starting point, especially for students and new professionals to really develop those advocacy strengths. State and national level advocacy. oftentimes seems really daunting and really scary for people. I am still sometimes terrified of state and national level advocacy, and I've been doing this work for almost 2 years. It is okay to be scared. Use the skills that you've developed to become involved on a larger scale. Know that your voice matters, and it doesn't matter if you're just starting in the profession. It doesn't matter if you're just a student, if you're just a new professional. Your voice is important. Don't sell yourself short. You have valuable knowledge and resources. Those of us who are just coming out of our master's programs have the freshest knowledge, have the freshest access to the most current research. Our voices are valuable in the counseling community. Never forget that. Reach out to your state counseling associations or national organizations. They may have a legislative or public policy committee to help you get involved. That's how I started my journey with American Counseling Association of Iowa. I was a legislative and public policy committee member, and as the only standing committee member, ended up inadvertently becoming chair of the committee, and it was hard work. It just absolutely terrified me, and I felt like I had no idea what I was doing. But by reaching out to other state counseling associations, by reaching out to SAGE, by reaching out to the American Counseling Association government affairs team, I gained the resources that I needed to become a really, really strong advocate. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask people for help. Attend events that are centered around advocacy. The American Counseling Association just had their virtual Hill Day. Your state counseling associations may also have a day on the Hill. These are really great opportunities to become familiar with your legislators and the legislative issues that are impacting the counseling profession and that are impacting client populations that you work with. Many of these Day on the Hills will help provide you with trainings and resources, and a lot of the time you'll be working in a group. So you don't have to be afraid of doing this work alone. You don't have to be afraid of doing this work without resources. Attending Day on the Hill, attending other advocacy-centered educational events can be a really important way to get involved. Phone banking is another really great way to get involved with that level of advocacy as well. So if you have an organization, so here in Iowa, we have One Iowa that will often host text banking and phone banking, and will provide you with a training at the beginning of the day. This is what you're doing. This is how you do it. And, they provide you with a contact person and say, here you go. Please contact people and let them know what we're doing and why we're doing it. Build relationships with the legislators that represent you and establish yourself as a resource for them. It's really important for us to remember that our legislators aren't experts on our field. Our legislators aren't experts on the issues that they're legislating. So it's important that they hear our voices. It's important that we build relationships with them so that if they have a question about counseling, my legislator has a question about counseling and a counseling related piece of legislation that's coming up, he's going to contact me and say, hey, I'm noticing this is coming up. What's going on? Those strong relationships are a really good foundation to get started and to make actionable change happen. Also, don't be afraid of your legislators. They are people just like us, I promise. Like, they don't bite. Yes, they, sometimes will put out harmful and scary legislation, and that in and of itself can be daunting. But don't allow your fear to overwhelm you. Another really great way to advocate is by advocating for position statements to be written by associations that represent you. So advocating for position statements to be written by the American Counseling Association, state counseling associations. If you see a need and need to contact the SAGE Public Policy Committee about a position statement that we may be missing, like, let us know, we're working on them. These statements can be a really powerful tool when people are going out and having conversations with their legislators, when they're providing verbal testimony, when they're providing written testimony, when we're fighting in court. Because we can go back and say, it's not just me that's saying this. It's an association that represents me that's saying this too. We have backing from our state association, from our national organization, and that's really powerful. So even doing some organizational advocacy and saying, you know, we need position statements so that we can then go do state and national level advocacy. That's really important. Become familiar with the legislation being introduced. The Human Rights Commission, the Equality Federation, and the American Civil Liberties Union are excellent resources for this. They each have their own legislative trackers, and most of them break it down state by state. So you can click on your specific state, see what legislation is being introduced that's going to impact you, see where that legislation is in the process. These trackers aren't perfect, but they're a really good place to start and can provide really solid information to help you know what's actually going on here. What do I need to be advocating for? And I would really encourage you to connect with state level LGBTQIA plus organizations and listen to the voices of the people being impacted by the legislation that's being proposed. These organizations can also be a really good starting point for a coalition. Coalition building is something that I'm really passionate about because the more our legislators see us working together, the more our legislators see us banding in groups, the less they're going to be able to ignore us. Also, within a coalition, you have access to more resources. It's less scary if you're not doing these things alone. So some of these state level LGBT organizations may already have a coalition formed, and you can just join the coalition as opposed to needing to build one from scratch, which is really difficult work, but again, very necessary work because there is so much strength in numbers and there's safety in numbers, and safety is critical when we're doing advocacy work. Know that at any level within your advocacy journey, if you are starting to feel unsafe, if you are worried about harm being done to you, your family, your clients, it's okay to take a step back and say, I can't do this type of advocacy right now. Reach out to people and let them know what's going on. They may have something else for you to do that's much more behind the scenes. Within the SAGE Public Policy Committee, we write position statements and we sign all of the names of the people who write the statements and edit them at the bottom. And we've outright said, if you don't want your name on a statement, even if you've written the entire thing, if you don't feel safe putting your name on a statement, that's fine. We are okay with that because safety needs to be a priority. So I have included my contact information here, and your wonderful chapter secretary has access to these slides as well. But I do want to give some time to open things up for questions and be able to talk to all of you about what support you're needing, what questions do you have, what are you running into?
Your peers, just some great examples, some wonderful
Emily, I'm having a really hard time
but-
hearing you. Could you type your question in the chat?
abs-
No, while she's doing that, Leo, I live in Florida, which is currently one of the worst states, and some of the laws and legislation that they have passed, and has garnered quite a lot of conversations with Jean and others on your committee, not just because of how it's impacting our state, but because the governor of our state has thrown his hat in the ring to be running for president.
Yep.
So, while we are kind of talking a bit today about what this might mean on the state level, and of course we have students from all over, it may be really helpful for you to, maybe talk about what this could look like should we see some of the replication of what's happening at the state level become more of a national issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are seeing this state by state become a national level issue already. This isn't, exclusively, I mean, like I said, 41 of the 50 states have introduced legislation that is harmful. As of the beginning of June is when we actually got those numbers. So I'm not sure, it may have even expanded by now. Because we know that conservative groups are already working together. If you notice, as you're looking at legislation from state to state, the language is very much the same. And if we see these things continue to grow, or Dr. Crowley, to your point, become a national level issue through a presidential election, or through Supreme Court rulings that could impact or reverse decisions, as we saw with Roe v. Wade, that give people protections, that give our clients protections, that give our profession protections, we could absolutely start to see an impact in how we as counselors can do our work, in how safe it is for us to remain living here. We are likely to see people become political refugees and flee the country. And we are already seeing, Dr. Crowley, you live in Florida, we are seeing people leave Florida because of the legislation. We are seeing a lot of clients here in Iowa that I've worked with who can no longer seek affirming medical care here. So I work with clients age 13 and up. So any of my trans teenagers can no longer seek medical care in our state. They are headed up to see physicians in Minnesota, and going to surrounding states and traveling upwards of 5-6 hours to find a physician who is able to provide them with the care that they need. So we're already seeing, at a state by state level, people becoming political refugees within each, state. I would very much anticipate that we are going to see people become political refugees and flee the country. But also, for those of us who do not have access to the means to do that, we are likely going to see increased suicide rates. We are likely going to see increased rates of domestic terrorism and violence against our community. People will die. Like, that is the long and short of it. And it's horrifying, but that's why we need to step in. That's why we need to advocate. That's why we need to make our voices known. And that's also why it's so important to have not only state level organizations working on this, but national level organizations working on this, and making sure that our position is heard loud and clear. We as counselors have a job to serve these vulnerable populations, to work with people as humans. And I'm getting very emotional about this because it is very serious. The number of times that I've heard a client say that they are a conversion therapy survivor and that they have been through the horrors of going to a counselor who's tried to convince them to change who they are. We are going to see more of that. We are going to see more people being harmed and being harmed by our field, by our profession. And there are a lot of steps that we can take to prevent that. That harm needs to be addressed from the ground up. So Emily, I see in the chat here, I hear often from peers that they aren't sure where to start with advocacy in the day-to-day. What suggestions would I offer for early career professionals on how to engage in advocacy at a daily level? When you're doing intakes, ask your clients what name they go by. Ask your clients their pronouns. Make sure that they know that they are safe in your space. I mean, because I primarily work with queer and trans clients, I have my big ass pride flag in my office. But even having books on your bookshelf that show that you are open, that show that you are affirming. Advocate for intake paperwork. Yes, Dr. Crowley, absolutely. Include blanks rather than check boxes. You know, if people don't know what to write after pronouns, you know, most of our clients will know what to do. We need to have faith in our clients that it's not just, you know, we don't need to give them the options. They'll know what to do. Obviously, for insurance and billing purposes, legal name, biological sex is often required for insurance. So yes, that needs to be addressed in the paperwork, but we also need to make space for gender identity, for a person's pronouns, for names that they go by. That intake paperwork, those intake questions can go a long way in just that day-to-day letting clients know that we're here, that they are seen, that they are heard, that they are cared about. There are a lot of really great resources for this as well. So SAGE has advocacy competencies for the broad LGBTQIA+ population and also for transgender clients. And hopefully in typing quickly, I spelled that correctly. It looks like I did. sagecounseling.org has really, really great resources for those of you who aren't quite sure where to get started. Making sure that within your organization, if you are seeing something happen, so if somebody who works within your organization isn't realizing that they're unintentionally misgendering clients or dead naming clients, gently pull them aside and have a conversation with them. Draw awareness to that, help provide them with resources to learn and do better. If you are seeing that there may be, you know, harmful groups near your practice, right? We don't always get to choose where we're going to work. If you have been anywhere near a Planned Parenthood ever, you may know that oftentimes protesters gather in front of Planned Parenthoods. Let your clients know that you understand how harmful that can be to see and how triggering that can be. And provide them with options for an alternative way to see you if that is too triggering for them to be able to come in person, if your office space happens to be near somewhere where that is a concern. I provide about 75% telehealth services. I just got my board certification in telemental health through the CCE, which is a fantastic certification for those of you who are going to be providing telehealth services. I highly recommend that you look into it if you are. Provision of telehealth services has been a really great way for me to advocate, again, on that day-to-day level, because I can reach my clients across the state. It's not just bound to, I'm only working with clients in Storm Lake, I'm only working with clients in Sioux City. I see clients everywhere here, and I reach all the various rural communities here. Openly advertise that you are educated and informed about working with LGBTQIA plus clients. Make sure that you are attending trainings to build your competence. Sage has great webinars, and Sage has an excellent conference. I believe, Dr. Crowley, this year's conference is virtual, yes, with Rob?
Yes, it is.
Yep. So this year's conference in October is virtual. So again, very accessible. Use that information to your advantage. These webinars can be a really great place to get some of this additional information of how we make our spaces accessible, how we make our spaces affirming. So hopefully that answered some of the, like, on the ground, this is how you get started. What
I
other
had a
questions do
question.
we have? Okay.
So I know that we talked about resources for clients. I'm kind of curious about resources for counselors, specifically when we're working with somebody who may have some biases against the LGBTQ community. And
Yeah.
I mean, I know that we notice, our own countertransference, and we try to be aware of that. But after, aside from, all of that and that support, are there resources for counselors working with clients that may have these biases, and we may not know where to go for that outside of our own therapist, but also and colleagues? But what resources can we use for ourselves?
I love that you asked that question, because it is something that our field hasn't necessarily done a great job of addressing. And I am sorry to say my answer right now is I don't know that there are any resources. There aren't any to my knowledge. I would encourage you to reach out to your colleagues, particularly as you're in training, particularly as you're under supervision within your first few years of licensure. Reach out to your supervisor. Let them know what's going on, because you also need to be mindful of your safety and the safety of your other clients. If you are unsafe within your place of work, if your other clients are unsafe within your place of work, you are not going to be the most effective counselor that you can be. So if you are concerned for your safety, it is okay to need to say, I can no longer see this client, because you need to make sure that you are being an effective counselor. And you can't be an effective counselor if you're worried about your safety, if you're worried about the safety of yourself, if you're worried about the safety of your clients. It's okay to say, I can't see this person because of their biases. Now, I will also say that sometimes someone who has biases working with a counselor who belongs to some of those populations, it may honestly be a good place for them to unpack and process that if they are ready to do so and directly confront some of these things head on. If you feel prepared to do that work with your client, and if you feel safe and supported in doing that work with your client, it can be a really powerful space to address some of the in the moment feelings that that client is experiencing while working with you, while sitting with you in that space. If you feel supported, if you feel safe, if you feel prepared to do that work. But do not compromise your physical safety. If you feel like that is in danger, have conversations with your supervisor, and it is not a shameful thing to need to say, I can't work with you. Dr. Crowley, Dr. Lip, anything that you would like to add to that?
Yeah, I would say, Crystal, one of your greatest resources is going to be, and I'll go back to what Leo said at the beginning of his presentation, is that getting involved with your professional associations, especially those that have branches of SAGE, will put you in contact with those colleagues that you now have to rely on when you are burned out, when you are experiencing a lot with your sites, with your clients, with the environment in which you work. It'll sort of organically build that support network around yourself. But as those of you who have had me in classes before, and specifically around supervision, I am a person who strongly believes in peer supervision for your entire career. And so developing that peer support group now that you can have to rely on at any point in your professional career. My biggest example is when I moved from Pennsylvania to Florida and had to shut down my entire practice. This was when distance certified counselors existed, so long before telehealth was a credential. But insurance didn't compensate for distance certified counseling. So there was a lot of clients that I had to refer somewhere else. My peer support group helped me assure that I handled all of those referrals very ethically. So, you can use this peer support in so many ways. And sometimes it's just, I don't need to talk about a specific case. I just need to talk about what it's like to carry the weight of being a counselor in our world today. So involvement in our honor society, absolutely, but also involvement in our professional associations.
Yeah. And Dr. Crowley, I will say really quick, bouncing off of that as well, for those of you who are SAGE members, the Public Policy Committee has kind of come together to start offering a space where we have that community care, where we have that support. And I don't want to get the time of our next meeting wrong. I know it is on July 1st at 2 p.m. So if you are a SAGE member and you have not been informed of this and you would like to, let Dr. Crowley know. She can get you in contact with us. Because we do have some of that support available as well through SAGE. Dr. Lip, anything to add to this?
Well, first, I just want to thank you for, sharing your experience and your journey. Very informative, and yeah, definitely doing a working with clients that may have these biases and working with them in session can definitely be quite therapeutic for those individuals. But as you noted, right, safety first. And when approaching our ethics, just keep in mind, definitely saying no, especially if safety is an issue, is important and indicated, but also having the referrals in place. That also is important. But yeah, I just want to thank you again. Excellent presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anybody else have more questions? I know we're kind of coming up on 8 o'clock, but I do want to make myself available if anyone else has anything they need to ask, need to share within the space.
Leah, would you mind dropping your email address into the chat so that our attendees can sort of grab that out should they want to have any follow-up questions? All of them know how to get a hold of me. Certainly, if they have questions or they can't find the email address. Many of you may know I do sit on SAGE's board as well as the state branch trustee. My job is to advocate for states that don't have branches of SAGE to get branches up and going based upon my experience of establishing our state branch in both Pennsylvania and Florida. So, we have a lot of contacts with SAGE that can be super helpful, not just the resources, but also the personnel. So certainly feel free to reach out to Leo. Or if any of you have questions following the meeting or in the coming weeks, feel free to reach out to me anytime as well.
Yeah. And like I said, Catherine does have my slides. I believe Emily does too. So my email is listed in there as well. So you have continued access to that information. And I really hope that I was able to help empower some of you. I know that this journey can be scary, especially as students, especially as new professionals. We're often told, You can't do that yet. You don't have the tools to do that yet. You don't have the resources to do that yet. And we often feel that imposter syndrome walking into these new spaces. You can do this. Like I said, I just graduated back in August. And so, like, it is possible. So just know that you aren't alone out here. Know that you have support. Know that there are a variety of ways to get involved, and it doesn't just have to be the big stuff. I appreciate all of you for being here.
And thank you again, Leo. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your resources and your expertise. The data is very, very helpful. And helping the group see the bigger picture. I think sometimes we can sort of feel like, oh, well, it's not happening in my area. It's okay.
Yeah.
The reality is it's happening, as you said, in 41 of our 50 states and provinces, and it continues to spread. And so if it hasn't touched you yet, it will be touching you very soon, no matter where you are. So very timely, very helpful. Do appreciate you coming today. I want to thank everyone for their time this evening. It's wonderful to see you all. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your night. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much to Dr. Crowley for inviting me in. I really appreciate it. I love sharing my knowledge. And so anything that I can do to help empower all of you, I'm happy to be of service.
Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
Have a good night.